Hello, everyone. This is Reverend Brian Jones, and I've written this sermon at the Armory in Washington, D.C. I'm here not as a minister, alas, but in another capacity, a member of the National Guard. I'm among the over 25,000 members from the Army and Air National Guards from every state in the Union, plus Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and the District of Columbia, who are here to help secure a safe presidential inauguration. And so I confess this sermon was precipitated by the unimaginable events from Wednesday, January the 6th at the U.S. Capitol, as well as the challenges we faced in 2020. But I promise you, it has a happy ending. And with that said, the scripture for today's sermon comes from the books of Matthew and Luke, New Revised Standard Version. Matthew, chapter 15, verses 21 through 26. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then a Canaanite woman from the region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered her, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And he answered again, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." And turning to Luke chapter 10, verses 30 through 32. Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed also by on the other side." Now, while some ministers cherry pick, I imagine a lot of you are thinking, "Reverend, you are not even picking the fruit. You're just giving us the stems." And you're right, because I think it's important that we examine the challenges spiritual people face in the Bible, not just the moral of the story. And so let's take a look at these scriptures. The example from Matthew is especially concerning because it depicts both the master teacher and his disciples literally discounting a woman because of who or what she is. What is it about this woman that has her earnest and virtuous request spurned without a thought? She's a Canaanite. Now we know the Canaanites were indigenous to the Promised Land long before the Israelites arrived. And the book of Joshua records that the Canaanite nation was one of a number that God directed the Israelites to destroy. Now, we understand this was not a commandment of genocide because clearly one has approached Jesus and his disciples for help, and there are actually still ethnic Canaanites in the world today. But we do know that the ancient Canaanites had social and religious rituals that, well, I should not comfortably describe them in a sermon. But their culture was deemed so dangerous to the spiritual health of the chosen people that its footprint had to be minimized and its population avoided. Over a millennium later, the Canaanites are essentially the untouchables of Jesus' time. Now, as a result, the disciples, and so it seems even Jesus, are so intent on eschewing this woman and everything she stands for that they do not see she is a woman of great faith. Even though she greets them, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David." And turning to my citation from Luke, even without its protagonist, I think most of us recognize this parable with its important moral: we must treat our neighbor just like that Good Samaritan. But what about the priest and the Levite, who were an elite class among the Jews with religious responsibilities? For specific reasons unknown to us, they did nothing. Some translations write that these highly stationed men just walked on by, and others, such as the version used today, they go so far as to describe them purposefully maneuvering their way to avoid the injured man. Avoidance. Now, this is what the subjects of these scriptures have in common, and whether it's out of fear, prudence, cultural or moral objection, these individuals hope to dodge an unpleasant experience. And when I think about it from my perspective, This was one of many hallmarks of 2020. Think about Facebook. What was once the world's go-to for grandchild updates and cat videos became a frontier of fortressed communities for singular-minded thinking, conjecture, even fervent belief. And I saw people cull their Facebook friends, removing those with the so-called wrong beliefs or opinions. Suddenly it seemed any of us could now be deemed a Canaanite. And it reminds me of an exchange I had with my reserved Southern mother who had traveled to see me in a college play over half a lifetime ago. "What did you think?" I asked. "It was very nice," she said, "but I don't know why you had to say those bad words." And full disclosure, my character was scripted a healthy share of bombs. "But, well," I offered, "you have to admit, there are people who talk like that in the world, and they can be viable characters." "I suppose so," Mom countered, "but I choose not to associate with them." "Well, that puts you ahead of Jesus," I replied a little too easily. "What do you mean?" she gasped. "Well, even he hung out with that Magdalene woman." Now, I know my take on Mary of Magdala was historically wrong, but I was right about Jesus. He generously shared his message and its gifts with lepers, tax collectors, Romans, and yes, eventually the Canaanite woman. I have wrestled with avoidance myself during these past few years, and I had a very low threshold for hearing about various national figures and their goings-on, for one example. Yet I also knew I had to be aware of the world around me. And following the 2020 election, it appeared that many people had done such an effective job at walling themselves off from different views, they reportedly didn't know a single person who voted for the other candidate. No matter how right we know we are, I liken this to painting ourselves into a corner. And this is metaphysically rendering ourselves spiritually ineffective when it's most needed. And yet, I can't help but think of Paul's dire warning in the book of Romans, chapter 16. "I urge you, brothers and sisters, to watch out for those who cause division and put obstacles in your way that are contrary to the teaching you have learned. Keep away from them." This is one among many scripture directing the faithful to avoid different people and ways of thought. It's important to know, though, that Paul, just as the writer of Leviticus, was concerned about the well-being of a fledgling and vulnerable faith. Emphasis on fledgling and vulnerable. So you've likely heard this timeless observation by the 18th century poet Alexander Pope: "Fools rush in where angels fear to tread." I want you to think for a moment, have you ever heard of a cowering angel? Have you ever seen a great romantic painting of a cowering angel? Of course not, because despite fear or dread, our angelic selves, our higher selves, tread forward. Now let's be realistic. In areas where you are fledgling or vulnerable, you are wise to keep your distance. Remember, personal responsibility extends to ourselves as well as those in the world around us. But where you are strong, especially in areas of faith, values, ethics, I encourage you to try to understand and be aware of things you disagree with, things that give you trepidation. Remember, accepting something does not mean embracing it. Let me repeat that. Accepting something does not mean embracing it for your own. Our spiritual selves will know what to do with what we've observed. Now, shortly after the nation-rocking events of January 6th, a friend wrote me that she had watched a video of a DC police officer being crushed behind a door trying to keep out insurrectionists. And she felt really awful after having seen it, and she couldn't stop worrying about what happened to that officer. And she was really filled with regret over the choice of watching it. And in reply, I kind of relied on Jesus' counsel from Matthew 15, or a version of it. And I said, that counsel from Matthew 15 is basically listen and understand. What goes into a man's mouth does not make him unclean, but what comes out of his mouth. That is what makes him unclean. And I assured her that the same could be said about what we see or what we hear. And I reminded her that she was a compassionate and thoughtful woman with a strong connection to the divine, and I had complete faith that in time she would know what to do with what she saw. Now, it's my hope today to show you that through these many examples that there will be times where we learn of the suffering of others and a higher voice inside us says, it's important that you witness this. Or perhaps we become aware of a widespread anger or fear among people, and the responsible adult, still the higher voice, in you says, you should understand what this is about and where it's coming from. By no means am I encouraging you to fall into that dark obsession called doom scrolling. Far from it. But if you are emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually postured to do so, please consider mindfully and responsively treading beyond your realm of comfort to understand more about the experiences of others. I personally believe that one of the greatest sins we can commit is to know the truth and do nothing with it. Now, going back to our scripture, when the priest and Levite saw a helpless stranger, they did nothing. The Samaritan chose to act. And the disciples, and even Jesus, heard the Canaanite woman express her faith and defaulted to their long-standing cultural bias against her tribe. Yet, Jesus thoughtfully challenged the woman once more, if you recall. It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. And when the woman replies, but do not even the dogs feed off the crumbs that fall from the master's table? Jesus acknowledges their shared faith and heals her daughter of her affliction with a demon. Now, before I go, I want to return to the story of that police officer in Washington, D.C. A few days after speaking with my friend, I saw a news story about him. His name was Officer Daniel Hodges. And it turns out that a 10-year-old girl from Montana had also seen that video. And not knowing what to do, she made him a card, even though she did not know what address she could send it to. But her mother was so touched that she shared it on Twitter. And as you can imagine, in a few short days, the images of that card reached Officer Hodges. And he soon connected with Emma, that 10-year-old girl, on Zoom to let her, along with the rest of us, see that he was going to be okay. I think we still have a ways to go before things settle down in this world of ours, and it's okay to have a little fear when we look out upon it. But like the angels, I hope you will faithfully tread when you feel it right to do so. Many, many blessings to you in the journey ahead.